everyone, welcome back to KXAN Live. Good morning and thank you for joining us here today on this Thursday morning. Today we have a little different segment for you all, and this is our weather segment, Kristen's Classroom with Meteorologist Kristen Curry.
Hey, Esme, how are you?
How are you? I'm good.
It's been a busy week, very busy week tracking Hurricane Milton, but you know, it's a powerful storm and it's a storm worth talking about while our weather stays pretty quiet here at home.
And I know that this storm in particular has brought up a lot of questions. One question, to be specific, is when will hurricane season be over?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially, you know, friends and family in Florida, are thinking, okay, back-to-back hurricanes, both major hurricanes. When is this season going to wrap up? So let's launch into Kristen's Classroom here, because when it comes to the season so far, we've had a good number of tropical storms and hurricanes. Season typically kicks off June 1st for the Atlantic and runs through November 30th. Now, something to note for the Pacific Basin, that starts 2 weeks earlier. We typically see more storms in the Pacific as a whole, but the Pacific, Eastern Pacific starts May 15th, the Atlantic June 1st, goes all the way through the end of November. So you're noticing here, the majority of hurricane season is behind us, but we typically see very active conditions August through the end of October. That would be peak here. The peak day actually comes September 10th, but we still have a little ways to go. We still have about a month and a half left. If we look at where we've been so far this season, 13 named storms. That kicked off with Alberto, of course, Hurricane Beryl, what was a Category 5 storm out there in the Gulf, eventually coming on shore as that Category 1 storm in the Houston area. Tropical Storm Chris. Alberto and Chris were both storms that made landfall in Mexico. But Debbie too. Debbie was another hurricane that made landfall, that one in Florida, followed by Ernesto, Hurricane Francine, Hurricane Gordon, Helene. Helene was the one that hit 2 weeks ago in Florida's Nature's Coast. And I've gotten some questions recently. Isaac, Joyce, and Kurt. People are saying, how did we go from Helene, an H-name storm, to Milton? Well, Isaac, Joyce, Kirk, and Leslie, in fact, were all out in the Atlantic, and they all strengthened, but they didn't impact land, which is probably why they don't sound too familiar. We didn't spend much time on TV talking about them because they weren't going to impact anybody here in the United States. Sure, some shipping routes probably were impacted, but in general, the ones that are going to pose a risk to property or people are the ones we're going to highlight. And the last one was Helene out there in the Nature Coast, and then most recently was Milton. But the next name on our list would be Nadine, followed by Oscar, Patty, Raphael, all the way down through William. Now, when it comes to Hurricane Milton right now, Category 1 storm is where we're at. This is going to continue to move towards the east and no longer be a threat to us, Esme. But obviously, we're kind of picking up the pieces of what's left behind here. And to answer that question, if I go backwards here and kind of show you what we expect, we look at climatology to give us an idea of the future. And at this point in the year, October typically averages about 3 tropical storms, 1 hurricane, 1 major hurricane. Well, we've already seen one of those, right? With Hurricane Milton being that major hurricane. So I would say we're probably going to see a few more of these tropical storms that develop, but it also gets harder and harder for those storms to reach all the way to the United States. So are we done with hurricane season? No. But if we average 3 tropical storms in the month of October, and the month of November averages 1 tropical storm and 1 hurricane, we're definitely on the tail end here. Waters do start to cool slowly. We do start to see more unfavorable winds in our atmosphere as well. So I would say, you know, and I know that's wishy-washy, but we expected this hurricane season to be more active than normal. I would say we're not done with the possibility of hurricanes, but when we look at our climatology, there would be about 4 more named storms in this season. There have been tropical systems that have developed in the off-season, like December. We never rule it out, but most of the time, the conditions out there in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico become pretty hostile as we get into the winter season.
And as far as those 4 storms that you were talking about, Do you think that these storms will stay in the Atlantic, or do you think they're going to come closer to land?
It becomes a little bit harder for them to get in the Gulf as we get later in this season, but it's also not impossible. In fact, if I show you what we're watching right now, there's 2 named storms in our basin. Obviously, we've got Hurricane Milton. We also have Hurricane Leslie. And then there's that one disturbance, which is way out there, just now coming off the coast of Africa with a 20% chance of further organization over the next 2 days to 7 days here. So clearly we've got some time. But also what's interesting is when we get into the fall season here in the United States, we start to see the jet stream wiggle a little bit more. Those troughs, those storm systems, those cold fronts that act to deflect storms away from the United States. If you have been watching us this time around with Hurricane Milton, we had a trough over the northern portion of the Gulf and that big old high pressure ridge over Texas. So that's why Hurricane Milton got nowhere close to Texas, because it was deflected away from us. We're going to start to see a little bit more of those troughs, those big wiggles in the jet stream that almost act as billiard balls, as pool balls to these storm systems. If they try and get close to a trough, they just get deflected and turn the opposite direction. It's unfortunate that Hurricane Milton did hit Florida, which was hit hard, obviously, not too long ago with Hurricane Helene, but it is that time of year, and unfortunately, it is part of living in Florida that they deal with these hurricanes. We're just grateful that it is now pulling away and no longer going to have any more additional threats to Florida. Now it's just kind of the recovery here, making sure everybody is accounted for. All the cleanup starts today, and then the ongoing river flooding. There's always going to be a delay in when the water comes down, when the rivers swell, trying to get back into the Atlantic. So that's where we're kind of at as far as the stages of Milton go right now.
And I wanted to share this video that I think we shared on air already of the destruction. I was watching this and I was just extremely sad looking at that, how strong those winds are, especially.
Yeah, for sure. So this is the Tropicana Stadium. This is where the Tampa Bay Rays play in Tampa, the baseball team. And unfortunately, you can see that roof was no match to those 100-mile-per-hour winds. In fact, if you're interested in seeing some of those numbers of what Hurricane Milton brought with both rainfall and winds, I pulled those this morning. This is something we were talking about on KXAN News today. Esme, if you want to go back to my weather computer, this was Sarasota, the 100-plus mile-per-hour winds, and look at the rainfall. I mean, that honestly is what caught me. Looking at the numbers this morning, St. Petersburg, 1.5 feet of rain in 24 hours. I mean, imagine 18 inches of rain in just one day. Tampa, close to 1 foot. Clearwater Beach, close to 1 foot. It's just wild to see some of these numbers verify, right? We warned about the 100-mile-per-hour winds, the hurricane force winds. We warned about the fact that we could pick up 1 foot to 1.5 feet of rain. That's exactly what Milton brought. Now, storm surge numbers, those typically come a little bit later. Obviously, it takes a while for us to go out there and look at the equipment and look at the technology that we've got out there to measure storm surge. The highest I've seen so far is 10 feet, but which is within that forecast window that National Hurricane Center was painting for parts of the Sarasota area, 10 to 15 feet. But unfortunately, this storm is exactly what we feared would pan out with the numbers there, with the rainfall and the winds. But obviously, the flip side of that is it was an accurate forecast, and I applaud the National Hurricane Center for nailing this one right on the head, because that's what we warned those in Florida for, and hopefully everybody heeded those warnings.
Yes, and we do have a question from one of our Facebook viewers, and it says, could we possibly see another storm in November?
In November, yes. So let me go backwards to the to my little graph here, because like I said, when it comes to climatology is a good way that we look forward, especially when we're looking more than 7 days out, right? Our computer models are really good 2 days from present. 7 days, you're good. Anything beyond 7 days, we start to lean more on what is normal. What do we typically see? What's average? And the average for November is 1 tropical storm, 1 hurricane. So it is certainly possible that we see a storm in November. But like I said, things kind of get pretty hostile once they get closer to the United States. Our weather starts to get more active, more wiggly jet stream. That's going to act to deflect these storms away from us. The waters tend to cool down a little bit more. But I would say, if somebody were to ask me, are we going to see another hurricane? I would say we'll probably see another hurricane in the Atlantic. Now, whether or not it makes landfall, that's a whole different other ball game. You know, that's a different question. I think it's going to be harder and harder for these storms to get as close as Milton did. But it's certainly not impossible to see in the late October. I remember even 2020, our most active season on record, we had Hurricane Delta that came in the late part of October and made landfall in southwest Louisiana, right near the Lake Charles area. So we know it's possible. We know things have happened before when it comes to this, but 4 more storms on average, if we look from this point forward, there with well, I would even say 3 more, since we've already done Milton, and we've already passed that climatological first October storm. So on average, there would be 3 more named storms, 2 more hurricanes. That tells us nothing about landfall.
And we know how quickly that can change. And we saw that with Milton, right?
For sure. I mean, the rapid intensifications, the way these storms are exploding over those warm waters. And I would say even with climate change, right, we're fueling these storms. Not that climate change creates more storms. Those storms are created 100% naturally. It's just the fact that as we continue to pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, you're warming up the atmosphere, and warmer air can hold more water. You're warming up the ocean. Warmer ocean feeds stronger hurricanes. So we're seeing more explosive hurricanes than what otherwise would not explode if we didn't have all those greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So I don't think, just given kind of the track, and it was a little bit of a weird season with Beryl being so strong so early, and then we hit this like real unusual lull where nothing was happening, and then all of a sudden it picked up in September and October. I don't think we're done with that second pickup. I don't think we're done with that second frequent hill here, but we're definitely towards the tail end of season. That's the good news. But textbook, it ends November 30th, but we know Mother Nature, she's in charge. She doesn't follow the textbook rules, right? But on average, we're typically wrapping things up here in about a month and a half.
And hopefully we don't get a storm as strong, but we possibly get some rain over here in Central Texas. I know we're all waiting for that.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, it's like it's a very fine line when you're wishing for tropical rain. But I'm hoping, like I said, with the weather becoming more chaotic, we call fall our transition season because the jet stream starts to wiggle a little bit more. I'm hoping by next weekend, we're starting to see little hints of rain on some of the extended forecasts. Now, this is more than 10 days away, so very low confidence in that, but there's a little hint in the extended forecast that we could get some rain next weekend.
Well, if we don't get that rain, I would prefer that colder weather in the morning to last all day.
Yeah, that's coming. That I have good confidence in. This cold front next week, I think, is going to give us a little bit more of a fall-like feel starting on Tuesday.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kristen. Is there anything else you can share with us about the hurricane or anything like that?
You know what, I would just say the recovery process, search and rescue is just getting started now. The sun is up, so check back in, KXAN.com for updates. Of course, we'll have an update coming up on KXAN News at 11 a.m. too, with meteorologist Tommy House and Freddie Vela. They'll have the latest on the science of the storm, and of course we'll have Will Dupree in with the check on the numbers.
Yes, and I'm sure we have some resources for donations on our website as well if anyone wants to help with that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. I know 2 good ways to help after a major hurricane. One, donations, monetary donations. That dollar can go real far with the American Red Cross, and blood donations too. Sometimes after a big disaster like this, the blood donation count comes down significantly. So whether it's dollars or blood, if you can do either one of those things or both of those things through the American Red Cross, which we've got a link to our website on, that's a good, easy way to help those victims in Florida when sometimes you can feel so helpless being this far away.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you for joining us, Kristen.
Of course.
And that's all we have today on Kristen's Classroom. Remember, we have a couple more streams scheduled for the rest of today as well as tomorrow and into next week. Don't forget to join us. I'm Esmeralda Zamora.